Alright, so I'm not going to bury the lead here. Postal Brain Damage for the Nintendo Switch is an absolute blast, and I love nearly every single minute of its 8-hour campaign. Postal is a series I've been aware of, but haven't really gotten around to playing before. It has a long history of pissing people off because it allows you to live out the fantasy of being a total raging deviant. Here's where I stand for context. Being allowed to blow up Megaton in Fallout 3 was a revelation for me. I've never beaten a Grand Theft Auto game because I end up getting too sidetracked, causing wanton mayhem. And the very first thing I did in Red Dead Redemption 2 was to test the limits of what was possible in the game world by removing the limbs from a civilian, hog-tying them, and dragging them into town behind my horse. What I'm trying to say is, if a game allows me to play as an evil bastard, you better believe I'm going full psycho. You should know that up front because that is exactly what Postal Brain Damaged asks you to do. You will spend your time running around hurling dildos at suburbanites, shooting cats at evil Cybertrucks, and pissing on everything in sight. If that doesn't sound like a good time to you, this game won't be your cup of tea. If you're like me and enjoy that sort of debauchery, I think you're really gonna enjoy Postal Brain Damaged. But here's the thing. If Brain Damaged didn't have the gameplay chops to back up its absurdity, I wouldn't be recommending it. Thankfully, the gameplay is tight. We'll hit the basics first. Postal Brain Damaged is a first-person shooter that combines classic find-the-key exploration with large-scale arena battles. The default stick sensitivity was way too high for me, but once I turned it down, movement became smooth as butter. The very first thing you'll notice about this game is how responsive the controls are. By the end of the opening level, you'll be jump sliding around stages, kicking projectiles back at enemies, and zip-lining around like a greasy Spider-Man. You'll never stop moving, and that is a huge part of why it feels so good to play. Level design is the highlight here, and it deserves special mention. Stages are excellent across the board, ranging from a suburban neighborhood, a creepy mansion, and eventually outer space with some really well-implemented anti-gravity playgrounds. Levels are often wide open, but also linear, requiring you to explore the space fully, solve some simple but fun puzzles, and hunt for secret rooms. Puzzles are mostly of the find the key or button variety, but they're structured in such a way that encourages momentum, never forcing you to stop moving as you zip around, grabbing items and unlocking doors. The implementation of these simple tasks breaks up the gunplay, while never slowing the game down. Brain Damaged consistently mixes things up, ensuring you're never going to be doing one thing in one place for too long. Often, levels will have extra explorable spaces with bespoke environmental details, like a house filled with hoarded toilet paper, or another filled with poop. And that's just the first stage. Every level is littered with humorous little details like this, and I'll leave those surprises for you to discover on your own. The combat arenas are the highlight of the experience, though. When you enter one of these open areas littered with bounce pads and multi-level platforms, the music intensifies and the game shifts into a glorious wildfire of bullets, blood, and destruction. For my money, these sequences effortlessly hold their own against similar sequences from bigger budget games of the same ilk. Thematically, the levels are all based on 2020-ish events, like a Trumpian border wall or a Comic-Con type expo that's a front for a covert Illuminati base. They definitely don't take themselves seriously. None of them wear out their welcome either, and each is more creative than the last. They're large and expansive, lasting upwards of half an hour each. One specific detail I really appreciated was that because the game takes place inside the protagonist's dreams, the levels themselves take on a sort of dream logic. A right turn brings you impossibly to the left part of the stage, and walls become ceilings in a sequence straight out of Inception. It feels like the developers were given free rein to build their dream playgrounds, and they absolutely understood the assignment. There's a level of sheer creativity here that really sets Brain Damaged apart from similar first-person shooters. Now let's talk about the guns. Conceptually, they're excellent. There are the typical stalwarts like a pistol, a shotgun, a machine gun, and a rocket launcher. Then there's a vacuum attached to a cat carrier that launches felines like saw blades, a brain in a vat that shoots out lightning bolts, and a bow and arrow that shoots dildos, complete with a little boing sound when they hit a target. I love the designs, but I ended up sticking primarily to the machine gun and the pistol. Everything else felt more conceptually fun than actually being practical to use. The need to reload is completely omitted, which again contributes to the go attitude of the gameplay. Each gun also has a secondary feature, the most useful of which is the grappling gun. There are also disposable items you'll collect, like a bottle of hot sauce that lets you pee napalm, and crack pipes that restore your health for some reason. They're fun, but I ultimately forgot about most of them in the heat of battle. The enemy design is fantastic though. Each level introduces one or two new enemy types with distinct attack patterns, and by the end of the game, you'll really need to consider prioritizing which ones to kill first. Collectibles take the form of posters found around the levels that give you a little quip about the enemies, the levels, the guns, or the items. Some of the enemies I didn't get until finding their poster, but they're all based around pretty funny puns or concepts, so I appreciated getting to read about them. Postal Brain Damaged is a very pretty game too. The lo-fi, blocky, polygon look is incredibly charming, especially when enemies explode into gory bits. It ran well on Switch too. There were some minor slowdown during some really hectic sequences, but I was too absorbed with the combat that it never really bothered me. There is one glitch that is worth noting, and that is the elevators. Multiple times I would get on an elevator to ride it up, and I would die. It's like I get squished on some invisible geometry or something. I highly recommend ducking before you push the button on an elevator. That seemed to alleviate the problem, but I really hope that gets patched. The audio is excellent as well. Appropriate music curated for each stage that pumps up into intense rock when the action gets going. Punchy gunshots feel impactful, and the enemy banter is amusing, including some really uncomfortable moaning when you kill some of the more seductive enemies. The protagonist too has a revolving door of one-liners that are amusing at first, but there just aren't enough of them, and by the halfway point you'll keep hearing the same ones over and over. None of the music stuck in my head, but it kept me glued to the in-the-moment gameplay, which brings me to my favorite part of this game. Its cohesion. Most video games provoke some level of flow state in the player, but Postal Brain Damage grabs you by the scruff of the neck, submerges your brain in a state of flow, and never lets go. I found it downright impossible to pull myself away from this game. The music, the movement, the level designs, and the glorious violence are relentless in their ability to hold your attention. If each of these elements was an instrument in an orchestra, Postal Brain Damage would be a perfectly in-sync performance. Unfortunately, despite being in sync, it's not quite a perfect performance. So here's a quick rundown of the things that didn't quite work for me. There's a brilliant mechanic that lets you kick projectiles back at enemies. The world slows down, a giant ball of death flies back at the baddies, and it's a hell yeah type of moment. When it works. In order to nail the kick, I had to slow down my movement, wait for the enemy to line up their shot, and stand perfectly still until just the right moment. It's a fun mechanic, but I ended up not using it very often since I found it slowed down the game's otherwise great momentum. I wish the window for success had been just a little bit more forgiving so I could have used it more often in the heat of battle. Then there are the boss fights. There are only 3, thankfully, and none of them are very good. One has you fighting against a giant Karen, and another is against the giant COVID virus. The COVID one in particular was a pain in the ass. You have to continually grapple upwards in order to get to the boss, otherwise a poisonous cloud catches up to you, all while the boss keeps trying to smack you back down. It's disorienting aiming up the entire time, and it's just not that fun. The other 2 bosses are just kinda uninspired bullet sponges. I would have preferred to have 3 extra normal levels to replace the bosses, though they're inoffensive enough and they're a minor blemish on an otherwise excellent product. The story was also a miss for me. Perhaps I need to have played the other Postal games to understand the context for it, but I found it basically nonsensical. You play as a dirty drunk dude who falls asleep and has absurd dreams. That's basically it. It's fine, and the social commentary is kind of funny, but I do wish there had been just a little something more to tie it all together. And that's it. Those are some very minor setbacks to what is otherwise a remarkably fun game. And with an MSRP of $24.99, it feels like the right price for what's on offer here. I will absolutely play this game again. Brain Damage was developed by Hyperstrange out of Poland, and I can't wait to check out this team's other games. Somebody, please, just give these guys the rights to make the next South Park game. Postal Brain Damaged is simply fun. I'm gonna give it an 8.7 out of 10. Thanks for watching, and please hit the like button and subscribe for more highly subjective game reviews.